welcome. I think we're ready to start. Okay. We're glad that you've joined us today. My name is Luann Good-Gingrich. I'm the director of the Global Labor Research Center at York University in Toronto. First, I want to recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede its establishment. We acknowledge that the area known as Takaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge that current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Because we're not gathered in the same space, York's land acknowledgement may not represent the territory that you're currently on. I ask that each of you take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory that you are on and its current treaty holders, to remind ourselves of the responsibility we have to care for the land, all living things on the land, and our relationships with them. So welcome everyone to this second panel in our two-part series entitled Rural Livelihoods and Socio-Ecological Well-Being in the Global South. I'm pleased to thank our co-sponsors, the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change at York University and the Center for Research on Latin America and the Caribbean, or CERLAC, also at York University. Our panel discussion today is entitled Rural Ways of Being and Knowing, Resilience and Well-Being in Southern Costa Rica. And I'm very pleased to welcome two scholars who will present their work today, Marcela Ortiz-Imlach and Francesc Rodriguez, and they will be introduced to you in a few moments. This series is a collaboration with the Global Labor Research Center and the Las Nubes Project in Costa Rica. The GLRC at York is a vibrant community of scholars and students who engage in interdisciplinary research and collaboration related to work, labor, and livelihoods. And I invite you to check out our website if you don't already know us, and drop us an email and think about how you might get involved. And I think Felipe will tell you a little bit more about the Las Nubes project as well. A few technical instructions before we start. We ask you to please use the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom screen to type your questions to the presenters, and we will reserve time at the end to take those up. And our moderator, Felipe, will collect the questions and read them for us and invite the panelists to respond. I also note that there is a live transcript available for you if you wish to follow along that way as well. Now I'm very pleased to turn the screen over to our moderator, Dr. Felipe Montoya, professor in the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change and director of the Las Nubes Project. Felipe. You're mute.
Oh, hello everyone. Welcome to the panel. I'm very pleased to be able to moderate this session. Very briefly, Las Nubes is a project located in Costa Rica, in the southern part of Costa Rica. It includes Eco Campus, for those of you who maybe aren't aware of that. We have a semester abroad program. We're engaged in research projects, and we have a strong community engagement aspect to the project. Our panelists today have both been in the Las Nubes area, in the Alexander Scotch Biological Corridor where we're located. Both are researchers who have gotten their graduate degrees at York University and have contributed tremendously to the research project of Las Nubes. So with that, I will start by introducing our first panelist, Burukuya Marcela Ortiz-Imlach. Marcela is a PhD student currently working on her dissertation involving research in the Las Nubes, in the Alexander Scutch Biological Corridor. She received her master's degree at the Faculty of Environmental Studies, and is one of the students that I'm supervising. So I know Marcela well, and after her we will be listening to Francesc Rodriguez, and I'll introduce him at that point. So Marcela, it's all yours. Right on the dot. So you fulfill the time requirement just right. Thank you. We will continue with Francesc, and then after he has presented, then we'll gather some questions and open up the discussion to the audience. So Francesc is currently assistant professor at Brandenburg University, University of Technology in Germany. He is in the Department of Technoscience. Last year, Francesc completed his doctorate at York University. So he's one of our alumni. We're very proud to have him be where he is at this point. As I mentioned before, Francesc did his work in the Alexander Scutch Biological Corridor, the same area where Marcela is doing hers. And so we hope to be able to bring these two scholars together and see their different approaches regarding ways of being and ways of knowing in the biological corridor in southern Costa Rica, and engage in maybe fruitful conversation afterwards. So Francesc, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Felipe. The pleasure is mine. Thank you. So I'm going to share the screen as soon as I can. Okay, so it's my pleasure to be here. I assume that you can see the presentation right now. And if not, just please let me know, because I usually use a different software.
Yeah, we can see it. At least I can see it, Francesc.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you. Wonderful, thank you. So today I'm going to present my work that I conducted in Costa Rica in 2014, 2015, and 2016. I conducted a multi-sided ethnographic approach in which I spent, as Felipe said, some time in the biological corridor, but also in other areas of Costa Rica. And in total, I visited like 36 research sites to do field work. I conducted dozens of interviews and conducted also advocacy research. On the top, we have here different pictures I took during my fieldwork. On the top right, you can see Gerry Rivera. Gerry Rivera was in the demonstrations against the dams in 2014. So this week, 1 year ago, he was killed in Costa Rica. And he was killed within indigenous territory by an armed mob of 100 people. He was killed by, I think, 5 shots. So this presentation is a dedication to his life. Having said that, I have to say that today I'm going to talk about different ways of imagining water, right? So I'm going to talk about ontologies of water. Having said that, I cannot say that I know all the cosmologies of Costa Rica or that I am aware of every cosmology of indigenous groups in Costa Rica. I don't, but everything I'm going to say today is focused on the areas where I conducted fieldwork. So basically, in the next part of my presentation, I'm going to present you three things. First of all, I'm going to give you a background about hydro-extractivism, a kind of political ecology approach to extractivism. Then the most important part is the second part, which I'm going to show you the ontological and epistemic dimensions of hydro-extractivism. And in the third part, I'm going to make the point on why the current knowledge practices of the sustainable development approach in Costa Rica should be changed and should be shifted to a transition to new ways of understanding nature and the life in the communities. First of all, I mean, probably many of you are familiar with this word, right? Extractivism, the increase of the extraction of natural resources, especially in parts of the world like South America and Latin America, which are used for the global market, right? So there is an economic aspect to extractivism, which the idea is that economy plays a role, but this is not the only role, right? So now we are talking about total extractivism as the erosion and tokenizing of land-based practices, right? So we have all this normalization of the logic of modernity, of extractive practices, getting into territories, right? And violently removing resources and also intervening in the ways of life of the people in many parts of the world, right? So this idea of total extractivism also, I want to, related to that, I want to talk about hydrospectivism. By hydrospectivism is the use of water for extractive purposes, right? And this is a trend that is increasing. Here you can see built dams in Costa Rica, and also project of future dams, which are in green, and also projects which has been cancelled due to protest movements, right, who have been able to stop and cancel the projects. Related to this hydrospectivism in Costa Rica, there are processes like privatization of the energy market and also the liberalization of the market, right? So for example, in the 90s, there was a wave of dam construction in Costa Rica. And you can see here the orange dots, which were a product of such wave of dam construction in the 90s in the north of the country. But now what we have here in blue, which are projects which have been stopped, are the last wave of applications which were developed in the last decade. When I started to do this project, my research project, I didn't know that these projects will be cancelled, but in the last years, we know that they have been cancelled. So basically, my work was focused within this red circle, in which a wave of 14, 15 applications for dam development was installed in the last decade. So my research is based on four main pillars. So the first one is the ontological term in the social science. So in the past, we used to see the conflicts as a conflict of interest or a conflict of resources. But now it's worth to look at the socio-environmental conflicts as different enaction of realities. So different worlds, different ways of understanding nature. And we have to scrutinize how they articulate such notions in order to understand what are the implications of such conflicts. The second pillar of my research is the need to scrutinize scientific expertise. This is something that in the last decade we have more work doing that, but however, we still need to scrutinize taking for granted concepts or notions which today we are going to see that they have a lot of consequences for our ways of understanding nature. And here, for example, we will see some concepts related to dam development and water management who have implications for the way that people relate to the rivers and to nature. And then the four pillars, which which I base my research on, is my concern about the increasing of espacios basura, as Alejandro Mantilla said in his book, Estas locomotoras necesitan frenos, which is the increase of espacios basura, right? So in all the world, but especially in Latin America as well, are these areas which are exploited for 2 or 3 decades, right? And then they're abandoned, just leaving some displacements and dispossessions for the people. I have provided you a background for this, and now I'm going to present you could say 2 papers, the results of 2 papers on which I draw this presentation today. In the first one is based on a discourse analysis of environmental impact assessments of dam development projects in Costa Rica. So the first thing I do is I did a discourse analysis of this environmental impact assessments, including the participatory events. And also, once we know the expectations that these environmental impact assessments have about the peasants, about the people living in the communities, then I provide an ethnography of the people. So how people receive and how is the reception of these environmental impact assessments in the community. So if we take a look, again, we have dam developments in Costa Rica. They have to go through 4 requirements, and one of the requirements is the environmental impact assessment, right? In this case, even though the projects were cancelled, the environmental impact assessments, they all gave positive assessment to the dam development. So they all green-lighted the project, right? So they said that the people agreed with the projects, they agreed with the developers, basically. So if we look at this kind of environmental impact assessments, if we look at the activities that they do, I drew a few conclusions about that, right? So the first one is that they have a view of the community as an historical community. So they don't care about the past of the people, so they see the community just as an instrument to build the dam, right? To build consensus and to try to make people to accept the dam, but they don't see the historical development, right? I will show later why this is important. The second point is that they see nature as a static, as something that is there forever and is not going to change, right? And that the dam is going to harmonize with the environment. The second thing that I saw when I look at these environmental impact assessments is the deficit knowledge. So they assume that the people living there, in some cases, that they have lack of knowledge about the project, and if they give more information, people is going to accept the project, right? So they have this banking model of education, as Paulo Freire said, right? So this deficit knowledge in which they don't know what people know, right? And they think that if they get more information, this will increase the acceptability of the project. This is not the case. Another issue as well is that the boundary making. So they take the communities and they create a boundary between the things that they can know and the things that they can know, that they don't know. For example, about the social sciences, right? They ask questions to the people about whether they like the project or not, whether they things about the social economic background. However, they don't ask people about the natural environment. And we will see later that this is important. The last point, which, sorry, is that my conclusion when I saw that is that they treated the people as inhabitants, as if people didn't live there, and if it's opinion about the environment, about the animals that they see, for example, and other things, as if it wouldn't matter. So this is a discourse analysis of participatory events and environmental impact assessments when it comes to see what expectations have about the communities. But now we look at the communities, right? And we have that this is there is a different world, a different way of understanding nature, a different way of understanding the plants, the animals, the rivers, etc., etc. And the first thing I have to say about the communities is that they have a historicized perspective about the world. So, for example, in one of the areas, in one of the projects of the dams in San Rafael, this is a place where there have been landslides in the past, in the 90s. So there was this Hurricane Katrina, right, in the 90s, which caused a lot of problems in America. And here in this community, for example, they suffer from a landslide. And this is not collected in the environmental impact assessment. Just a small mention, right? So the people were afraid about this landslide, and you can see here the quotation from a person living in San Rafael, right? So this event has been completely ignored by the environmental impact assessment as if nothing had happened in the past. So they don't have a static view about their environment, right? So the environment is dynamic and it changes, unlike the portrayal of the environment by the environmental impact assessment. And this was the landslide that there was in 2017. There have been many in the last decade, well, a few. And this is another person who asked why the ecological fault did not participate in the environmental impact assessment. The environmental impact assessment should include everything. So this was very interesting for me that the community, the people, they give agency to the landslide, right? And they see that the environment is not static, but rather it may have an influence. And for example, it may have a bad influence or impact in the case, if in the case it was a dam there. So historicized perspective, important thing. Then another disagreement is about the way knowledge is created, right? So we see in the communities that when people knew about the dams, it was not only because they read the environmental impact assessment. So for knowing the embodiment, to put the body there, it was a game changer in the way of understanding the potential impact of dam development. So as we saw earlier in the map, in the north, there were dams which were built in the 90s, right? So with the experience of these people went to the south to tell the people what it is to live with dams. So after that, the people of the south of Costa Rica went to the north to see the dam, and people really was frightened, even shocked. So when we can see here this testimony, right? So when I visited the site of the dams in the north, I wanted to cry. My hair stood on end, right? This was enormously impactful for us. So to live with a dam, close to a dam, is not an easy game. It's not as beautiful as it may seem, right? You have sludge, you have mud, right? A dam smells as well, but these are some things that you cannot see when you see a picture of a dam or a presentation, right, with an idealized representation of a dam. This is the experience of one person of the south when they went to the north to see what it means to live with a dam. They went to the north and they were shocked that the area close to a dam, it is fragmented and there are pipelines everywhere. So the question here of this person was this a river or a pipeline? I wouldn't say that it was a river in the past, but not now. This is a pipeline and not a river. So again, so they were shocked to see what what are the ramifications of a technical system like a dam, right? Totally different than when you see a dam on a paper or on a booklet. Another thing, as I said before, in the environmental impact assessment, the people who produced such documents, they didn't ask the community about the life of species or of animals. And this is a very important thing, because when you want to develop a project, if in this area you have endangered species, then you cannot develop the project, because protected species, right, are protected for some reasons. So there are regulations for that. What happens in the environmental impact assessments is that they were not able to find some species which are endemic in these areas. So the community, they knew that, members of Los Vivos of Costa Rica, peasants, other people, so they form a coalition with other scientists, but scientists who have the trust of the community, and they compile a list of animals that they have seen in the areas where the environmental impact assessments were conducted, and they were able to demonstrate that, for example, in these areas, there are otters living there, or fish like Briconammericus terrabensis, and other animals which are endangered in this particular area. In this case, I think Briconammericus terrabensis is endemic, and I think otters are protected in Costa Rica as well. So creating a coalition between the community and between the more than human community with other beings, they were able to challenge the conclusions of the environmental impact assessment. And this is the first part I wanted to show you. So the expectations of the environmental impact assessment about the community, and how these expectations don't match with the real actions of the community, right? So once I have shown you this first part, we're going to the second part. And now we are going to focus about the meaning of water, rivers, or even pozas, as some say in Costa Rica. So if you want to build a dam, or there is something called environmental flow. So in a dam, you divert water, you use the water, and you discharge the water, right? But in the middle of that part, there is a flow of the river which becomes dry, right? There is nothing there because the water has been diverted. But there is something called environmental flow, which is the water that is left in a river ecosystem, right? To keep the river alive, so to say, right? So not to take 100%, but rather to leave something, right, for the species or for the people who live on this area which the water is diverted. Sometimes this area in which the water has been stolen is like 4 or 5 kilometers. So it's a long stream within the river. So this is the environmental flow, right? So to measure the environmental flow, we can see here to the right that there are 4 different approaches. The hydrological, they're very similar, I have to say, but the most simple one, the most easiest one, is the hydrological one. So basically what they do is that they measure the water, and then they calculate, so they measure the average of the water, and then they calculate a percentage of water. And they decide, for example, that 10% is what the water that has to be left for the communities instead of using for producing hydroelectricity. 10%, the question is, why 10%, right? Why they use 90% and they give us 10%? Why this kind of environmental flow? So for the communities, this is a difficult thing to understand, right? Because here we see the testimony of one person who say, well, what is the logic behind this formula of environmental flow, right? So we don't understand the magical formula of the so-called environmental flow yet. So the fact that they leave 10% of the river for the communities. Here we see 2 pictures, which I think were used by Otto and community leader Otto Mendez, a community leader of the north of Costa Rica, in an area which they have experience with the dams. This picture has been taken in the same place, but before and after a dam was built, right? So basically, what we can see is that the environmental flow, the 10% is nothing, right? You have nothing but stones there. And he used these pictures actually to show the people that 10% is nothing. And here another testimony, which is, oh, we only have, they will only give us 10%. It's something like giving gold in exchange for mirrors once again, right? So there is a continuity of coloniality of practices right here, right? 90% for the developers and 10% for the community. And if you ask me why they use 10% in Costa Rica, actually, you have to go back to the United States in the 70s, because if you look at the environmental flows in many places of the world, the 10% has been used actually. And if you look, if you make a reference of that, why you have to go back to the 70s in the United States. Basically, they calculated the water needed for a particular fish species to live in Montana, Wyoming, or Nebraska. This is the Tenan method. And the conclusion was that if you leave 10% of the water, this fish species can be alive. So these are very localized research, right? However, this formula has been used all across the world without any contestation. So we here the problem of extrapolating things, right? Of using concepts, scientific concepts, which are produced in a particular context, and then they are used everywhere. And this is one of them. The reason why 10% is considered to be an environmental flow, right? This is why using to enforce it, I like to say that this is an environmental orthodoxy, right? So taking for granted notions about the environment, which are produced for a context, but they are used in other contexts without reflection. And this is, for me, one of them. Environmental flow of the Tenan method, which is good, but the problem is when you use this all across the world. Consistent, I will finish in 2 minutes. Consistent with that is, my argument here is that developers use a purified view of dams in order to hide the real consequences of dams, right? And I'm showing you these pictures because I think they represent very well the kind of dams that they use. Here to the left, you can see a river which has been dammed. However, this was used in a presentation for the communities. However, here it's beautiful, right? With the blue river, the green mountains, there is no sludge, no smell. The 10% of the river, which we know it's nothing, they are stones, it's represented as a beautiful blue flow of water, right? So this is a technologies of representation to tame the consequences, to tame the nature, right? But if we look at the river in the communities, we see that river is a different thing. It's not only a mass of water, something quantifiable, but something that is alive and it's part of the community. And you can see here all the relations of the community with the river, which is reciprocally sustained. You can see here when the dam is represented in different activities that if the dam is built, a espacio basura, a wastage zone, is going to be created as well, right? So the river is alive and the river can die if the dam is built. And here you can see different day, but similar style, right? So the river as part of the community, which if you build a dam, this river may be destroyed, right? It's not only about 90%, doesn't matter. If you catch the river is going to die. The river, which is considered a living being. Or here in this, this is the one more slide and I'm over. And this is this was in a demonstration in San Jose against the dams, in which the activity was to put the hand here and to feel the blood as if it was water. So the idea was if you cut your blood, you will. It is the same as cutting the river, right? So this is the representation of water as life blood. And just as Mario Bosa said, we Costa Ricans do not need to be told over and over and again what we must do. I take that point. I don't want to say what Costa Rica has to do with all this, but I only want to say three things which for me are important. The first one is the need to challenge current public participation in environmental decision making, and the need to open up the hegemonic worldview of Western science, and to recognize that there are other possible worlds which are different, and these worlds have to be in some way or another included in the decision-making mechanisms. Otherwise, we are going to have a lot of socio-environmental conflicts and problems, which I think this is not a very fruitful thing for any country. So instead of treating the rivers as mechanized, isolated masses of water, to recognize different worlds and try to put these worlds into dialogue or to valorize what the communities, the worlds of and rivers that communities articulate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesc. Very good, very nice. Super interesting. The two projects looking at local realities, local worldviews, local ontologies and local epistemologies, and how they are confronted with external worldviews, perspectives about peasants, perspectives about nature, about rivers. There's a lot to talk about here. I'll open up the question and answer first. If Francesc and Marcela, do you have any comments on each other's presentations that you would like to comment, or questions you would like to pose? Then I'll make a few of my own comments and then open up to the audience, which has already presented a few comments in the chat.
I have a comment. I mean, I find that my work and Frances's work has one issue that for me is pretty important in the critical moment that we are living now, and it's the fact that we both are addressing this separation between humans and nature. In the sense that for me, the incorporation of well-being is trying to include issues that are not being valued by the policymakers, by the developmentalist thinking. And so I think that Frances's work is also on that kind of territory, with a very different theoretical framework, with different tools, but I think we are at some point also addressing the same issue. That's what I feel, right? That he is showing us how these developers create narratives to convince the people and to create that division and destroy nature in the name of development. I don't know what you think about that, Francesc, about that comment.
You're muted.
Yeah, we need your mic. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. You have a question, sorry.
No, I was wondering if you agree on that.
Well, yeah, the separation of nature that you say, right? And you meant that by the government, you meant, or by the logic?
Yeah, by the government and by everyone, because I don't know what is your experience, but in general, in Costa Rica, the narrative about nature is very powerful, but how they destroy nature is also very powerful at the same time, right?
Yes, I agree that this is the thing. So the percentage of protected areas is increasing in Latin America. It was 22%, it's increasing to 25%. However, the espacios basura, the wasted zones, are increasing too. So we have this challenge, right? To try to find conservation in working lands in lands where the people live as well, right? Because even though we are increasing protected areas, and this is great, however, it's out of there where there are different natures, social natures with the people, with living beings, which has to be harmonized, right? And this is the challenge I see.
Yeah.
And this view of nature, as nature is not only when it is protected, this could be, I think, a problem for conservation.
I think if I might, Francesc, do you have any comments or questions on Marcela's?
Oh yeah, I find your work very interesting, Marcela. And
thank you very much.
And when you say about the peasants, well, about farmers, people living with the land, and I know that in Spain, I know that in Latin America, I know that in Germany, people now this year have less plata, less money than 1 year ago. I mean, we are having all problems. I have family in Spain, with tourists are not coming. There's less money, less plata, and instead of money, people are looking now at the things, at the food, at the fruits, at the gardens. So the last year, gardens in Germany, gardens is a big thing. However, the last year has been even improved the interest, has increased the interest for gardens because of the situation. So do you think the particular COVID-19 situation in the last year could have revalorized this idea of having your own land, working your own land, having your own subsistence methods?
This is, for me, is a very important question, Francesc, because I think that the COVID crisis it was a kind of shock, because at some point there are so many human values and the relationship with nature that are being reclaimed, revalued. But at the same time, the attack from the 1% of the rich, the richest people, I think this process has catalyzed the attack that they are going to prepare for this moment. So I think it's a kind of fight between awareness of people about what really matters and how food is one of the main things that we need to fight for. But at the same time, the 1% is going to utilize all the tools that they have in order to not modify the status quo. That's what I feel about the COVID. So I don't think what is going to happen, but I think that it's a very, I think we say in Spanish, catalyzer. I think it's the same in English, isn't it? Catalyzer, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
Okay, Marcela and Francesc, thank you. I want to be able to give opportunity to the audience, so we'll just move on ahead. One thing that I see common to both of your work, and it has important implications, is how conceptualizations that are carried by powerful by the powers of the state or private enterprise and the hegemonic ways of knowing are imposed on not only on a sector of people, peasants, and how they see themselves or how they're valued, but also on more than human nature. And so these visions, for example, the environmental flow that you mentioned, Francesc, it carries with it the halo of science. So it itself is a local knowledge of a specific nature, but as you say, the danger is extrapolating and imposing that local knowledge on other localities and other ways of being and knowing. And I think both of you speak to the desire of what you mentioned also, Francesc, of a world that can hold many worlds. Respect for difference, respect and acknowledgement and even celebration of different ways of knowing, different ways of being, and how each locality also encompasses these different these different ways of knowing and being, and that they should be valued. So when you have concepts that theoretical concepts or prognostics of peasants that they're continually going to disappear, and yet there they are. That's one lack of understanding of their values, and I think that's something Marcela is looking at. And when you impose a 10% ecological flow on a river and consider that as viable, it also is a colonial imposition. I think both of your works are very interesting, very valuable, and looking at the importance of local knowledge and local lived experiences. I have a couple of questions that appear in the chat. One from Deborah Barnes, and she's interested in seeing if in both of your work, if there were particular contributions around well-being and around epistemologies that come from indigenous communities. Maybe
would you like to go first, Frances?
Yes, please.
Go ahead, Marcela.
Well, first of all, I want to say hello to Deborah. I love you, Deborah. Well, I didn't, you might understand pretty well this kind of limitation. When you are writing a chapter, your brain are just in a kind of mode, right? And that mode is how we incorporate well-being and business studies. But the concept of well-being transcends what these people is telling me about why they want to keep being a peasant, because we are now in a moment in which these cosmologies from Ecuador, Bolivia, where the concept of well-being, it is a concept that it works as a political, ideological platform from where oppose neoliberalism based on true principles, and harmonious relationship with nature, and another kind of relationship between human beings. So I think that broad conversation about well-being should be part of my work, and also it has been a kind of the driver of my process, because for me this connection between what people say and this political platform is very close, and more in Latin America, when there is no, in some communities, you know, that there is no difference between indigenous and being a peasant. So I think that the indigenous cosmologies are really trying hard and articulating an alternative project for development and from capitalism. So yeah, for sure that they're going to play an important role in my work, and yeah, I totally agree with you. Yes.
Thank you, Marcela.
Yes, yeah, a very interesting question. Thank you. I met members of the Berber community and the Baruca community, for example, but to distinguish what is indigenous knowledge and non-indigenous knowledge in the particular area of my research, it was actually not easy, right? The idea of incorporating indigenous knowledge, it has to be done in the context of this particular indigenous community, or the Berber of the Baruca. And I cannot say I can talk on behalf of that, or as I said before, I have conducted research in 35 sites, research sites, and even though in these sites sometimes there was indigenous community, I cannot say that I know the different cosmologies indigenous cosmologies within Costa Rica, which are rich and multiple in any case. For example, the concept of buen vivir, for example, right? La buena vida. So I can say that, which is the concept, which I think has from Colombia, right? And now it's used, widely used in all Latin America, I would say. So I didn't find the use of this concept when I did fieldwork in 2014 and 2015. Even though now I can say that it is widely used, but when I did my work, I cannot say, for example, that I see the use of the buen vivir concept, which now is used by many people. The concept which has the origins in discussions with indigenous people and other social movements in South America.
Thank you, Francesc. Yeah, that's a very important point. Those concepts and those terms and that language it begins to appear in the region, but and be appropriated by different groups, peasants and indigenous. But yes, you know, and clearly they have their own cosmologies. But as Marcela also says, being a peasant and being indigenous sometimes, depending in the context, is the same. In Costa Rica and in the region, there are clear differences between peasants and indigenous folk in terms of their political condition and their territorial condition. Although you find commonalities in their views of what well-being is. There's another question from Peter Ducker to both of you. To Marcela, he asks if you have seen differences in terms of generations, the generational difference in terms of their concepts of well-being. And to Francesc, he asks if stopping the dams, the fact that they were stopped, was this directly related to the resistance by the communities? So with Marcela first.
Hello, Peter. I think this is a very, very important question because one of our major concern is that many people who are now working the land maybe belongs to older generations, even though we can see a revitalization in many parts of the world. But in the particular context of the ACBC, the COBAS, what I see is a very strong desire from the older generations that the generations forthcoming be engaged in agriculture, maybe having one other profession just as a way to diversify activities, but they are very interested that they keep growing coffee, that they keep growing food. In fact, they say, I dream about my children and my grandchildren making this land more beautiful that I couldn't do it today. So I think there is a kind of a strong mandate from them. But my experience with the young is that they are not that, they are interested in living in the area, but not necessarily in engaging in like fully in agriculture, maybe helping with the harvesting, but as a secondary activity, right? So I hope that this answer your question. Thank you.
Yes, the level of protest movements was very high, and perhaps I was not able to show that in this presentation, but there was a lot of protest movements against the dams using different methods and different activities, right? From demonstrations, from doing apersonamientos, which means to challenge the environmental impact assessment, etc., etc. But actually, the point is that, as I said before, the environmental impact assessment was green-lighted the projects. However, to build a dam, you have to go through 4 or 5 different steps. So, you know, the state is not monolithic, right? So the state has different doors, and when a door is closed, you have to go to other open door, right? So in this case, they use other requirements to build a dam, like, for example, water concession and other requirements, and they were able, one by one, to stop the development of dams. But for me, no doubt, the protest movements play a very important role. Even though I have to say, to be honest, that when the projects were cancelled, I wasn't doing fieldwork anymore. However, the pressure of the environmental movements has been very high in the last years. And even though now there is no dams anymore, the environmental movements and the farmers, the peasants, working together against new challenges and doing environmental activities, this work still continues today.
Yeah, and maybe I can add a little update to that, how the continued resistance of the local communities started to mine the interest of these developers, because these are not huge dams. They're small dams, and with an important and significant impact on the rivers. But I imagine that the developers weighed the cost value of continually having to confront the initiatives of the communities that set up legal impediments, and so that was part of the reason. And another reason, at least in one of these dams, is actually the documentation of a endangered species, actually a species that was considered extinct, which was the harlequin toad that appeared in the Peñas Blancas River. So that also put a monkey wrench in the dam projects, in their plans. So a number of reasons, and the discovery of the harlequin toad was a combination of efforts of community, citizen science, and also York University researchers. So that was a significant finding there. I have a few other questions. Let's see, from Nilanjana to Francesc. He says, I used to work for mining and was shocked to see the quality of health impacts in these assessments. There was a massive gap when it came to integration complexity as well as mitigation. Did you have any similar experience with yours? Your comment about the static versus dynamic view of nature could play a massive role in this. That's for Francesc.
And the question was if I found inconsistencies in the environmental impact assessment?
Yeah, and the issue of the health impacts in these assessments.
Oh, yes. I mean, they didn't focus very much on the health impacts. They didn't see any potential health impact on the communities, I have to say. But actually, if you look at the evaluation of environmental impact evaluation, the evidence says that actually they miss like 40% of the possible impacts on the communities. So now we have research on dams is increasing, and by just looking at the evaluations, we know that there is a gap of knowledge in these kinds of evaluations, because basically they are talking about the future, right? And we know that the future sometimes is different as expected in these particular cases.
Thank you. And another question from Paulina Lezama, and this is directed, I think, mostly at Marcela, to comment on any possible differences you might see on poor peasants of the global south versus of the global north, and if you can comment also on the new peasantry concept coming out.
This is a very nice. This is a very good question, and I cannot address as I would like to, because it requires more time. But the concept of new peasantry, the way I understand it from Van der Ploeg, the scholar from Netherlands, what he is arguing is that many peasants, he make a classification of 3 stratas: peasants, entrepreneurs, and capitalists. And what he is arguing is that some of entrepreneurs and even some of the capitalists are moving to the peasant way, like peasant way of farming or practices to reduce again the dependency on them from the market. And he also, he is against this idea of dividing the world in peasant from the south and the north. I think that you can find a lot of difference between peasants within a country, within a region, within a continent. For me, there is no way that you can define one kind of peasant. There are some things that they share. For example, the relationship with land, or the way that they don't see food as a commodity, because there are so many making processes that they are involved to when they are doing what they are doing. So I think for me, these divisions are much more about difference between schools of thought about peasants. But if we look today at the La Via Campesina, you can see that there are peasants or farmers from Canada using machinery there, with landless peasants from Brazil, with family farmers, with people from Europe. So the claim there is how they can transition to agroecology, how they use food sovereignty to think about food in another terms and not as a commodity. And the issue of class and colonialism, of course, it really plays a role when you, for example, in Argentina, when you have the soy producer. Well, the soy producer cannot be part of the La Via Campesina, because the way that the capitalists need to make a profit is based on a particular terrible way of producing and a terrible relationship with nature. But I think that, for me, we should kind of think more about what we are fighting for in terms of food production and helping the peasants to stay in the world. And no, I don't see that that's the difference between conceptualization of peasant can help us a lot. But that's my personal view on this matter.
Maybe just one last question from the audience, and or do we have time for that? Let's see. One final question. Luan, yeah? Do we have time for one more? Okay. So this is from an anonymous question. If indigenous communities would benefit from the development projects and be able to participate in the market that these projects open, would the response be different? That's a theoretical question, but it addresses, I think both of you can conduct that, Frances specifically.
Marcela, we have a specific case in the Dickies Dam project, which indigenous people were offered a lot of things, and they didn't want the project to develop. And the Dickies project, which was a huge dam project, has been cancelled in Costa Rica. And this project had the particular opposition of indigenous communities. But this is not the place, I have to say, where I did my field work.
Yeah, the area in which Frances did his fieldwork does not contain specifically designated indigenous territories. The Dickies project, as Frances mentions, was the largest dam project of Central America planned, and the main opponents to the project, even though they were offered many benefits in terms of being able to enter the tourism world with using the dam as a touristic destination. They rejected that dam completely. And some of the reasons were from a worldview of theirs that it would flood some of their sacred sites. And so here we have local knowledge and local ontologies and epistemologies that counter the dominant views of economic well-being as the end all of well-being. And so I think that last question brings both of your works together, how there are other ways of understanding well-being, and that the local struggles against these dams is evidence of how that can manifest itself in the world. So thank you guys both for presenting in the panel. I'll hand it over to Luan. And also thank you, Luan, for allowing this to occur.
Just a brief closing for today. Thank you very much to our presenters, Marcela and Francesc, for sharing your important work with us. I look forward to learning more from you. To Felipe, thank you for moderating. And I also want to acknowledge the GLRC coordinator, Hadjer Mawali, and the Las Nubes project coordinator, Ana Maria Martinez, for their technical administrative support. I think this collaborative series was really significant in forming research across diverse disciplines and multiple fields of study. So thank you, Felipe, for collaborating with us on this. So we hope to stay connected with the hope that you all who are here with us today stay connected with the Las Nubes project, as well as the GLRC. Check out our websites, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye.